Today, we're going to explore gender equality in higher education, leadership, and beyond, as we hear about the journeys of these incredible women here today. I'm Gemma Payne, and I'm head of SUPC, and I joined the education sector 2 years ago as head of procurement. I'm now head of SUPC. I'm going to hand over to Aya.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm Aya Ferguson, and I joined Sums about 5 months ago as head of consulting, but I have been an associate and a client of Sums for many years, and I've worked in the higher education sector in transformation and change for over a decade at various different institutions, including UCL, King's, University of East London, just to name a few. I'll hand over to Alice.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alice Chilver, and I'm the founder and CEO of WEN, Women's Higher Education Network. I've worked in the sector for about 15 years now. Most of the time I was at UCL, and then most recently at the University of Oxford as the Director of People and Organisational Development. And alongside my role in the sector, I've been working on the sector through the Women's Higher Education Network. So delighted to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Monica.
Hello, hi. My name is Monica Nangi. I'm the Academic Registrar and Director of Student and Academic Services at Durham University. I've been here about 3 years, and prior to that, I was in similar roles in various other institutions across the country, most notably being SOAS, Queen Mary, and King's. I've been in the sector for about 20 plus years, starting to show my age there, but I've enjoyed every moment of it, and I'm really delighted to be here.
Thank you. Karen.
Hi, my name is Karen Omishuri, and I'm the Executive Director of Student Administration and Academic Affairs, currently working at the University of Southampton. I've probably been here about 18 months now. Prior to joining Southampton, I worked at the University of Hertfordshire, and I've also done spells at London Metropolitan University and also the Open University. Slightly different journey because prior to joining higher education, I actually worked in industry within finance and banking, but I'll tell you a bit more about the reason for my change later on this morning.
Thanks, Karen. And Beth.
Morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here. I'm Beth Besant. I'm the Executive Director of Faculty Operations at UCL. So that's a role that helps to oversee and bring together the professional services across our 11 academic faculties. Before coming to UCL, I was at the University of Surrey, and before that, the University of Exeter, in a variety of roles between faculties and central services.
Thanks, Beth, and welcome all. It's great to have you here this morning. So we're going to go around and have a conversation around International Women's Day and what it actually means to us in our careers and how we've got to where we are today. So I'm going to ask the first question, and I'm going to pose this to Beth, if this is okay. So what progress has been made during your career towards sort of gender equality?
Thanks. So I think I've been pretty lucky through my career in that I don't feel like I've been systematically discriminated against, but I do think we can all think of those times where maybe things didn't go quite as planned, or people's responses to you was not as you would want them to be. And I think the real indicator for me is that I now notice those times, those points where somebody says something or does something and you think, I'm not really very sure about that. But I also think we're getting a much better culture now in being able to challenge those and call them out, and it's much easier to do that. I think there's also been a move towards much greater flexibility, and thank heavens for COVID. It's the only time I'll ever say that, in terms of how that has helped us to kind of bring in a much more outputs culture, I think, where we're much more focused on the work that we're delivering rather than being in at 9 o'clock and leaving at 5 and getting everything in between, and really trying to focus on that it's okay to be flexible in how we work. And that's really helped us. And then lastly, I think for me, I do see a better diversity of thought and of voices, particularly around our appointments. We do have a more diverse board at UCL, but looking back at the previous institutions I've worked with, I can definitely see that shift slowly but surely coming, and both across all areas of kind of intersectionality, I think that's made a real difference. I think there's still plenty of space to improve, but it's definitely heading in the right direction.
And sort of following up on that, Beth, sort of saying you still think there's areas to improve. Where do you think substantial gaps still remain?
From a professional services perspective, I think if you look around most organisations, you will see that at our more junior grades, they are still remain heavily female dominated. And then you flip that round and look at senior posts and board level, and you'll see that that's maybe in reverse. And where are these people coming from? We're not growing them through the sector because we don't have those same percentages. So how are so many of our male counterparts getting those senior posts when the pipeline is so female dominated? So that's the bit for me. And I'd like to see that balance tip both ways. I'd like to see more diversity in our junior workforce, just as I would like to see more diversity in our senior workforce. I think the other bit to me is around our academic colleagues. There is still, I think, real generational gender disparity in our academic staff, and that culture has not shifted as much as we would like it to. And I think there are still some real barriers on the academic side of things to female progression. The points where you get to the interesting bits of your career tend to tie in with more challenging aspects of your personal career in academia, even more so than in the professional services. And the great need past your PhD and as you rise up through those different roles is more challenging than it should be, I think, for female colleagues.
Thanks, Beth. I'll just open it up to the floor now if anybody else has got anything to sort of add to Beth's comments at all from your own personal experience. Alice?
Yes, Beth, I resonate with everything that you just said, and it reminded me of the very reasons that we founded WEN in the first place. I had come to higher education from the private sector, and I found myself, and maybe you can relate to this also, Karen, I found myself for the first time in my career surrounded by women. In the private sector, I was surrounded by men. So I thought that was unusual, and I was enjoying being surrounded by women. But I noticed very quickly that when you looked at the senior leadership levels in the university, that they were predominantly occupied by men. And so me and colleagues were asking ourselves, well, how can this be the case when the majority of the workforce are women? And that's true of the academic workforce, it's true of the professional services workforce. So what is going on? Why aren't more women progressing to more senior leadership levels? And of course, not every woman wants to be the next vice chancellor or the next chief operating officer, but you can be sure that there are plenty that do want to reach more senior roles in their careers, and there must be something going on that is getting in their way, because there's nothing wrong with women. So what's wrong with the system that's preventing women from progressing?
Thanks, Alice. Monica?
Can I just come in on that? That's what I'm observing around me is there's not a lack of appetite or intent among women to rise to the top. So as Beth and Alice have just articulated, I think there is a lot of interest and drive and ambition, but the reality is so different on the ground. The support systems, the networks, the sponsorship that's required to rise to the top is what's dragging women down, I think. We've got, if you look at top 200 universities in the world, only 48 of them have got women as vice chancellors. Now, our workforce is in majority of them are women, right? In our higher education sector, it's 56% women. But as we rise up, the numbers do start to diminish. So we need to start asking these questions. I know we've been asking, but we need to really, really accelerate this work we've been doing about promoting women in these positions, especially in the current environment.
Thanks, Monica. Karen?
I was just going to say, thank you for sharing those stats, Monica. I feel, though, that there has been progress made, particularly of late. If you think about how many recent vice chancellor appointments within the sector have been women, and also deputy vice chancellors. So whilst when I started my career in education, there are hardly any women in vice chancellor roles, I'm heartened that we are making progress, albeit probably slower than one would hope, but it's still progress. So I'm holding on to that as a win. And, I'm hoping, roll forward 5 years' time, it's even better stats.
Brilliant.
Right, thank you.
Can I just jump in and I agree. I think we have to really we have to hold on to the progress. And I do remember at Exeter going to a faculty meeting in a more male-dominated subject area, shall we say. And I looked around the room and there were 50 people in there, and I was the only woman in the entire space giving a presentation on something. I know that wouldn't be the case now. I've seen those faculty areas, and it is very different. That doesn't mean there's not some space to move and to keep going, but we've got to see how far we've come in what is a relatively short space of time after hundreds of years of stagnant movement and not very much had to change.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my background is procurement, but I see it very similarly throughout my career that actually, when I look back when I first started as a purchasing clerk 25 years ago, it was a very male-dominated place to work, and all the senior roles were males. But now, when I look at the roundtable discussions I have with our members within institutions, there definitely seems to start to be a shift to see more heads of procurement or CPOs that are actually women as well, which is great to see, and it's good to reflect on where we've come and where we're going to. I think a lot more that we could do across all sectors, to be honest with you. And I think, do you think that we hold ourselves back at times? I mean, I'm a working mum, so my own career and looking at where I've come, at times my children are older now, so I feel I'm more capable of being able to take more senior roles, to take that weight from the family and be able to think about my career in that perspective. And it's not always the same for everyone's different. Everyone has different support mechanisms around them, but sometimes it does feel quite lonely at the top, and especially when you're a working mum as well, balancing, family life and then your career, it's a difficult place to be.
A stat that I'm very aware of, because when we started and we looked at the proportion of vice chancellors, there were only 20% of vice chancellors that were female. Today it's 33%, and that's in a 10-year period. That's changed. We started the 100 Black Women Professors Now programme 3 years ago, and in that period of time, the number of Black women professors in the sector has more than doubled. So I think, it's clear that if we, as a sector, as individual institutions, as small collectives of individuals, are clear on what we are trying to change, we're very focused on how we do that change, and also apply a healthy dose of accountability around it as well. We can change the status quo, and we are changing the status quo, but obviously what's really important, and I suppose this is why it's important to have conversations like we are today, is that we cannot afford to take our eye off the ball for a second, and we still have much further to go. And although the sector has made outstanding progress in terms of gender equity, not all women have benefited from those initiatives, which is why you see such shocking statistics now, like the small number of Black women professors in the sector. So I think it's important to celebrate how far we've come, but also to keep really focused on the few things that can make the biggest difference in this next kind of phase, I suppose, of gender equity for the sector. And we do need to see more men showing up in different roles and in different ways as part of that equation. I agree with you as well, Leah.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good time to think about or compare with other sectors. So Karen, I've got a question for you, because you gave us a little teaser in your introduction. Why did you choose to work in higher education then, and what differences do you see in gender equality in the higher education sector compared to the previous sectors that you've worked in?
It's a really interesting question. Thank you for that. It wasn't a choice per se. So as I said, my early career was in finance and banking, and I was very fortunate to apply and get a role on one of their management training programs. So it set out over a number of years the type of duties you would be doing, when you were expected to change roles, etc. And what became really obvious to me from day one is that despite doing well in my role, alongside, I guess, my male colleagues, I was held back. And I didn't have the confidence very early in my career to speak out. And there were a couple of reasons why. I think there was this notion that I should be thankful that I managed to secure a management training role with one of the large retail banks. And back then, you know, it was considered a great role. It was considered a job for life. And the fact that I was so thankful and grateful, I didn't have the confidence to speak out and say, why am I being treated somewhat differently from my peers? You know, I'm passing my banking exams, my professional exams. I'm doing just as good as other colleagues. I do remember on one occasion, I managed to pluck up courage and challenge why I hadn't been moved on. And what I was told is, well, you're good. You're good at your job and you're reliable. So that was the reason why I was being held back. Fast forward, I think a couple of years, and I realized that, you know, this just was not fair and I wasn't very happy. So I left what was considered to be a job for life against the wishes of my family, who were absolutely appalled. I mean, how could you? Why would anybody choose to do that? And I went and started to work for an American outsource company. And lucky for me, when I joined, my line manager was a female who was absolutely fantastic in terms of that personal development and growth. So I was fortunate to do numerous roles and be promoted on numerous occasions very, very quickly. I then left and went to work for another competitor within the outsource industry. And I immediately found that I was the sole female working amongst a very male-dominated senior leadership team. In fact, I was the only female and I was the only Black female working alongside these men. It was very aggressive. And at the time, the culture was, if you sent an email as late as 11:30 at night or 11:45, you know, you got kudos for that. There was no flexibility or recognition that as a mother, because I'd recently just had my first child, that I needed that flexibility. There was absolutely nothing available at all. This began to really grate on me, and I became really, really unhappy. And I remember speaking to a colleague that I'd worked with some years back, and we were on the phone for possibly for about 2 hours, and I was obviously having a right old whinge about being dissatisfied and, you know, the fact that I'm a young mother, there's no flexibility. They expect me to work all hours and still go home and do my other work as well. Now, a lot of my family members and friends that I'd grown up with had gone into education, either primary or secondary education. And at that time, I'd made a decision that I was going to become a teacher, because why wouldn't I? In my mind, they were very, very flexible. Back then, I thought you had all the luxury of the school holidays, and I only saw it at that time as a job that was possibly 8:30 to 3:30, and then you get all this personal time to yourself. And I remember coming off the phone to my colleague, and she encouraged me to update my CV and just to put it out there. And I was like, oh, it's going to be a complete waste of time. And she said, just put it out there, you'll never know. As far as I was concerned, I was going to become a primary school teacher or secondary teacher. Anyway, I took heed of what she said, came off this conversation, updated my CV and just put it out there, you know, sent it to a few recruitment agencies. And I kid you not, no word of a lie, the very next morning, I got a call from a headhunter that said, we've got just the role for you that calls upon your skills. I said, well, in teaching, are you sure about that? Because as far as I was concerned, I was going to become a teacher. And I remember this gentleman pleading with me just to say, please, can I have your permission to send off your CV? I think you'll be fantastic. And I think it's just what you need. And all he said to me, it's in education, but he didn't expand on anything else. So once I'd agreed, he then came back and said, they really like the look of your CV and they'd like to invite you in for an interview. And that's how I ended up working for the OU. And I've never looked back. So that's how I ended up in higher education. And just thinking about the question you asked, Haya, about how does gender equality compare in this sector compared to other roles I had? I mean, there's just, there's no comparison. Just based on what I've shared with you, I find working within higher education a lot more flexible, a lot more understanding, and I no longer find that I'm in a position where, as a leader, I'm amongst, you know, or that it's mainly dominated by men. So yeah, no comparison in terms of my past and previous career.
It was clearly meant to be, Karen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else want to share any examples from other sectors? Yeah.
Not so much from the other sectors, but just reflecting on Karen's really fascinating journey. I do feel that we are privileged in the sector we're in. I think higher education has been leading the way here. But When I was doing some research looking at how private sector has actually made a difference in gender equity at the board level, I did find some really good examples in the private sector, especially multinationals who've been leading in this space. But the recent events in the world are really beginning to cause an alarm. And I think this sessions like these, where we're talking about accelerating action, have become even more important. And the onus on higher education sector to lead the way is all the more important now than it has ever been. I'm looking at organizations across the world that are dropping EDI from their agendas. I mean, that's an absolutely alarming situation we're in. We're all impacted by it, aren't we? I know we've got organizations across Europe that are holding on to it. And increasingly, some of our own universities are coming under fire for pursuing EDI agendas. But I think it's really, really important for us to keep championing the cause of gender equity, especially the areas that we've made progress in. I feel particularly proud being at Durham because we've got a woman chancellor, a woman vice chancellor, a woman secretary, and then there's me. And I think it's a fantastic position to be in, but I don't take that for granted for 1 minute because it can be easily lost if you're not careful.
It's yeah, I suppose it's there's never been more important a time to reflect on the role of leaders and leadership in making courageous decisions, being consistent with their thinking and decision making about prioritizing initiatives like EDI. I've been thinking a lot recently about the comparison between the corporate social responsibility agenda and what happened to that as a movement and EDI. Are there similarities with how CSR, corporate social responsibility, kind of rose to prominence? There were large pockets in private sector organizations in particular whose priority was the corporate social responsibility agenda, and now it sort of seems to have been mainstreamed to a certain extent with things like big globally recognized kite marks like the B Corp accreditation. And I was wondering whether, EDI might go down a similar sort of route where it becomes mainstreamed and sort of a standard normal expectation of what organizations do, and very much kind of like at the forefront of the shape of them, or whether there's an opposite route where it sort of dissolves and it's kind of, it's sort of the explanation is that it's part and parcel of the day-to-day work, but actually it's sort of more dissolved and disappeared as part of a kind of movement within organizations. I suppose there are many other ways in between it could go as well. But I've been obviously, because of what's going on in America, reflecting on that a lot at the moment. And I think already over in the UK, of course, many organizations are already talking about echoes happening over here about what's happening in America. I think that my own view is as a sector, we have a responsibility to be beacons of best practice and to morally and ethically demonstrate what good can look like. And I think we're in an exceptional position to be able to do that. We've got a job to do potentially of convincing some of the other sectors and organizations that this is how you do it and this is the reward you get for doing it well.
Monica, I have a question for you, if that's okay. What actionable steps can institutions take to dismantle systemic barriers hindering women's progress in leadership roles?
Thank you. I think that's a really, really interesting question. And it segues quite nicely from the discussion we've just been having. For me, there are a number of things, but the one that is an absolute top priority is modeling inclusive behaviors in senior leadership. That is absolutely fundamental to setting the strategic priorities for the organization, which then trickles down to the rest of the sector. I think modeling that behavior in the form of leaders actually giving priority to inclusive agendas, to women gender equity and keeping our commitment to publishing gender pay gap data, because that's come under fire, hasn't it, recently, which worries me immensely. I think some of the other areas where we can take some really significant steps is bringing our leadership pipeline along and really investing in people. So we talked earlier about the number of people in junior positions who are women and they're not making up to the top. So what's going wrong there? How do we nurture that leadership pipeline and genuinely investing in those areas? And when I talk about investing in those areas, I'm talking professional development activities that are targeted and supportive, that meets the needs of women and in the environments they're currently in. You know, Karen talked about the struggles of women with small children in workplace, and I think that recognizing those pressures and that keep supporting them to aspire to leadership positions and keep developing, I think that's really important. And the other one I think for me is it's really critical is challenging bias in recruitment. We talk about unconscious bias, we talk about training and so on. I think there's a lot of that good work happening in our organizations, but calling out bias that exists without causing offense is very, very hard to do. And I think finding ways of continuing to challenge bias where it exists is absolutely critical. So those are some of the areas where I think we could really make significant progress and bring along our male counterparts, our allies, because they play a very, very important role in this. My boss currently, he is at Durham. He is an absolutely phenomenal guy. I mean, he supports women in all positions so much. I mean, he's a vocal proponent of that, and modeling that behavior for others to see and making it a norm. It's small efforts, but actually they have a ring to it. They really inspire others to stand up and speak for women in leadership positions. So I think those are some of the things I would suggest are absolutely critical.
Thanks, Monica.
I think I'd add something on maternity as well. So I really really resonates what you're saying, Monica. But I think there is something, and I was chatting about this over the weekend actually with some friends about how we really support women and organisations around maternity leave. We do a little bit. We effectively pay people to go away and look after their babies for a while we pay someone else to do their job, and then we expect them to come back in as if life has not changed. They're going to do the same job in the same way as they did it before, and we don't really acknowledge that fundamentally their lives have totally changed. And so might their priorities and the way they want to work and the skills that they bring and all the rest of it. I think fundamentally, as both individuals and as organisations, we're very poor in acknowledging that transition, and increasingly we support people with retirement. For instance, we recognise that as a really big step in your kind of life journey, and we provide additional help, and there's books that you can read, and we can talk about that transition. And we don't do that for maternity leave. We think that it's perfectly normal that suddenly you've worked and your entire focus has probably been around your career as a woman and how you advance it, and then all of a sudden it's but I've got my career and I've got this family that's of equal importance to me, and how do I support both of those elements of my life, and what support am I going to get when I come back to an organisation to help me transition, to understand that I can work flexibly, I can do something differently. How do we support women physically, but also in their kind of mental transition, both in and out of work? Because I think it's probably one of the hardest things we do, to give up your job that's been everything that you've wanted to do for quite a while, and then say, okay, no, I'm going to give it and hand it over to somebody else, and I'm going to be happy about that. And then when I come back, I'm going to pretend like the last 12 months haven't happened, and I'm going to walk back in as I was before. So some real support, proper support around maternity leave, I think would really help people at the point when their career and their life is really coming together in a way that it doesn't at other points.
I can really resonate with that, Beth, because when I had my son, I was made redundant for a bank at the time. and unfortunately the whole organisation was absorbed into Barclays, and we were all made redundant. So after having my son and being off on maternity for 9 months, I had to go out and find a new job. So not only not going back to the organisation where you worked before, but having to start again in a new organization with a young child. And unfortunately, he had lots of health issues when I started my new job, going to nursery. He was very poorly. So that conflict of like, I need to be there for my son. I had to take him out of nursery, things like that. I had to get family to look after him, and transitioning. I was just very lucky that I had boss that could see the potential in me and was very supportive of, work from home, Gemma, make the hours up where you can, if you want to, your priority is your family, but your job's safe, just do what you can. It's about output. It's not about the hours you do. I mean, like literally we were very worried about his ill. He had very low white blood count, to get into personal details, but we were really worried he had to be pulled out of nursery, and that like 5 months into a new job, and a 14-month-old son trying to navigate, what am I going to do with him? And they let me reduce my hours. I went part-time, and then once he was in a more stable position and I'd been in the organization for a couple of years, I then went back up to full-time hours. So I was really lucky in that role of having a great line manager who was female, and she just really understood where we were, and the head of procurement was female as well. So I'm not saying I wouldn't get that support from a man boss, but it was just, I was very lucky from that perspective. And I think you look and reflect at what paternity leave is now. You can now share it with your husband as well, and it impacts on them. And I think sometimes we don't recognize that having a family has that impact on the father as well, and they're working full time. They want to spend more time with their family. So actually, from two sides, I've seen a change in the last 10 years around the fact that you can share that maternity leave with your husband in some organizations, because sometimes women just don't want to stay at home, and they want to go back to work quicker, and it's been able to be flexible, I think, as well.
It's interesting you say about Beth, about being more supportive in maternity leave. I would go one step further and say, how do we harness those returning parents who now have a whole different outlook and how different skill set? I remember when I had my first, who's now 19, I can't believe that. I was working for a commercial consultancy at the time, and I remember coming back, and the CEO met me in the lift on my first day. It just so happened, whether someone scripted this, I don't know, but he met me in the lift on my first day back on from maternity leave, and he said, just to paraphrase, if I was resourcing an assignment of consultants, I would choose, if you had exactly the same skills, I would choose the returning mother over anyone else, because you know how to juggle, you know how to prioritize, you know how to get shit done quickly. Which was obviously music to my ears, because I was back in feeling a bit uncertain, and my confidence was low. You don't get 360s very much as a mother at home, do you? So he said the right things at just the right time. Whether it all translated into reducing some of those systemic barriers, I'm not sure, but it was that kind of the concept of actually, how do we harness those skills that I now had as a mother, because I knew how to juggle and so on. So I think that's I would go one step further even than just supporting, if that makes sense.
But I did, not everyone recognizes them, and I had a very similar experience when I was a lot younger, and we had a mum who was returning. She'd had a long sort of 7 or 8 year career break, and she was coming back part-time, and my boss at the time said to me, every team should have a working mum, that they prioritize, they see through the politics, they don't take any rubbish, all of that kind of stuff. And I absolutely remember thinking, what the hell can she offer in 22 hours that I can't offer in 60 hours? I'm here, I'm doing it. And then I had children, and I remember that conversation about once a week, because we don't value enough the skills that come with being a mum. And I fundamentally believe that I'm better at work now because I'm a mum than I was beforehand. But we don't value that society or in enough companies, I think, to see the benefits of it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Alice, question for you. How can institutions develop and implement effective diversity and inclusion policies specific to leadership positions?
Thank you. I've got to get my head into gear around that now, because I'm just reflecting so deeply on becoming a mother and the impact it had on me when I returned to work, and actually how I agree with what you're saying, Beth and Aya, about kind of, the skills and mindset and competencies of mothers. But I do think that you don't get there overnight. And there is quite I think, significant transition from like landing back in the office to feeling that sense of confidence in yourself and what you bring and what you're worth. So yes, so just going to move from that that mindset to the policy piece. So I suppose, in my experience, it's essential to be really, really clear on what the problem is that is trying to be solved. And I think that a lot of the time we, as organizations, as universities, we do have kind of like a formula and approach for how we get something done, how we change a policy, which isn't necessarily always based on that deep understanding of what is the problem that we are trying to solve. How will people think differently if we're able to do this effectively? What will people do differently if we're able to make this change effectively? How do we want people to feel differently if we're able to deliver this change, whatever it is that we're seeking to do? I think that often we kind of rush into designing a solution before we've really kind of thought through and got alignment with the major stakeholders right at the beginning on those things. We kind of, we have a tendency to do a lot of the thinking in design work and then consult. We consult really well, don't we, with all of the stakeholders, but that's what we've already tried to figure out what we're doing. So I think that we kind of probably need to spend more time. I don't want to say more time doing consultation, but more time understanding the real problem before we try and go into solution mode. I think that in order to understand the real problem, we have to be more human-centered in our thinking. Like, it's not about the policy, it's not about the document, it's not about the strategy, it's about the people. And I do think that we aren't terrible at that, but I do think we could go further with it. And I think it's difficult for us as a sector almost because we have all of these research papers at our disposal, all of these world-leading academics who have done research, who have answers, and it's easy to go and talk to them or read the paper and not have the discussion with the individuals impacted because we can just read the paper. But until you kind of have had that first-hand discussion with someone about their real lived experience, it doesn't quite kind of become real, and you perhaps miss the mark a little bit and go into solution mode a bit too quickly. So don't get me wrong, I am not advocating for more lengthy consultation processes, but just kind of real human-centric thinking and really real clarity on what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And then the very last thing should be about then defining the policy or writing the policy or kind of like neating it all up in the document that then kind of says what we ought to do. And I think that's part of the challenge across the sector when it comes to practice versus policy, is that we tend to think that because we've got a policy that says that is how we will all behave across the organisation, when in actual fact the policy is just a document, a bit like a frisbee, gets produced by people, sent out across the organisation. Everyone's like, what was that? Oh, it's just the new, well-being policy. Fine. So that those discussions and that deep work about really understanding the problem and getting real alignment around what that problem is, and then designing a solution based on really what we want people to be literally doing, thinking and feeling differently, is the most important thing. And the policy is the kind of like icing on the cake that just kind of is the reference point almost. So I think what, as a sector, we ought to be doing is putting more focus on the policy and more focus on the practice and less on the policy, which is the tip of the iceberg. And so get better about how we do that. And essentially that comes down to what you're an expert at Aya, which is how we do change, what change really looks like, how it really works, how to do it really well. And, there's never been a better time that we're going to, as a sector, need to focus more and more on that, given where we are as a sector and the inevitable change that's coming, whether you're an institution that's affected financially or not, we're all going to be changing quite significantly. Yeah, so that's my short answer.
And do you have any sense of, just as a follow-on, because working in the change space, and I've worked with quite a few EDI teams across different institutions, and one of the challenges is always that there's lots of strategies, EDI strategies and policies, but actually how do you turn that into action? And I have been on the receiving end where I've said to EDI teams, I'm an ally, I want this, but I don't know how. Please help me. And they don't always know the specific action. So how do we turn that into action? Because it's easier to write a policy, it's easier to write a strategy, but the actual doing, how do we almost crowdsource what those actions are? Because I think there can be allies, but we don't always know what it is that we need to do to really get that step change or really, shift the dial.
Yeah, well, I think there are two big things at play that are both equally important. And partly, the first part is about people's behaviours, the actions that they take, their mindset that's driving those behaviours and actions. And if we take an example, like Monica, you mentioned earlier, like unconscious bias across the sector. So as a sector, we recognise that we are all human beings, we are all biased. So we have unconscious biases. So how do we tackle unconscious bias? Okay, well, let's do unconscious bias training. Let's get as many people across our institutions through unconscious bias training as possible. Okay, that's great. And that will be making a difference, but it's not going to make the difference. It's not going to be everything. There will still be unconscious bias at play. And actually, probably the longer it was that we did the unconscious bias training, probably the more unconscious bias training there is going to be at play, because, we are busy people with roles getting on, and our minds and focus is getting occupied by different and new things. So on the one hand, there's like the individual behavior, the individual mindset, and then on the other hand, there is the system and the practices and the policies that are at play. So for an example here with unconscious bias, if we're trying to make sure that the right people who are the most talented and have the most relevant experience get promoted through the promotions system, we can do unconscious bias training to try and make sure that the panels are making the right decisions. But at the end of the day, they are all human beings and there will be bias at play. So what else can we do to try and make sure that the promotions process doesn't have bias in it? And I think that's where we ought to be braver and be more experimental with how we use technology. When we are developing an AI-enabled promotions scorecard, which isn't meant to replace the academic promotions process. Of course, that wouldn't be a helpful thing to do in its entirety. But if we recognise that bias is present in decision making, and in the academic promotions process, there are clear criteria that you need to meet in order to and that you can demonstrate that you've met the criteria. You don't need to stew over that application for 2 days with 20 people to look for evidence that the criteria is met. That's where you can use AI technology to look through information, recognize evidence, and then report back, okay, here are 10 applications which all have sufficient evidence, and here's all the evidence that is met, for instance. So I'm just kind of, I suppose, using that as an example of how, we can use technology and tools and systems and practices to help change the system, as well as working on our own mindsets, our own attitudes, our own behaviors, and our own approaches. And I think probably in order to really deliver the kind of change we need to see, it's going to be a combination of the two.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm just reflecting on, I'm doing a master's in business psychology at the moment, and one of the modules is on recruitment, and interviews are in fact one of the least reliable methods of recruitment for sort of future performance. So maybe we need to reduce some, and of course they're very biased, so maybe we need to reduce the amount of interviews we do and find other ways of selecting people for roles and for promotion, as you say, Alice. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the policies and
I suppose just reflecting on Alice's comment about policy and competing pressures, financial pressures on our institutions, I think it's really, really important to remember that when institutions try and focus on strategic priorities, and if financial pressures take the top position, which is what's happening, we're observing that, what gets relegated down, what gets deprioritized, because something has to get deprioritized. And the risk here is inclusion and diversity, and the efforts we're making in this space and the policies that we are developing and designing in this space gets deprioritized. And by that, I mean the resources being attached to it they disappear. Yeah. And I think that's such a huge risk that we are currently facing that we need to be really mindful of. So how do we protect those and ring fence those resources to continue with this battle at our hands, and keep fighting it, because it's a battle. You've got to keep at it, otherwise you lose ground. With gender equity particularly, we are gaining a lot of ground there. We are making good, really, really good progress, as we've all acknowledged. But it's the loss of that progress that worries me immensely.
And that leads in perhaps to the next question. Alice, you want to come in first?
Just briefly, I think I agree, Monica. And I think, in this period where perhaps we haven't been battling hard, we've been battling away, but it's not kind of been under fire, I suppose, the EDI work that we've been doing in the way that we've seen recently. I think what's a shame is that we missed the moment for the business case to be properly understood, because I think if our institutions and other sectors as well really, really believed the business case, we wouldn't have to be justifying this work, and it wouldn't be the first thing that feels like it's going to be cut when under pressure. But the business case is crystal clear. Diverse and inclusive work environments have half the amount of staff turnover than environments with a lack of diversity and inclusion. They have 4 times the amount of innovation, 3 times the amount of productivity, or something like that. It's like very, very impressive, chunky benefits, chunky return on investment that organizations can expect to see if they manage to get this right. But I think that, clearly it's not really believed or understood, because otherwise we would be focusing much, much more resource and time and attention on doing these things, because the rewards are so clear and so great. So yeah, I feel like in a way we almost missed the moment for people to get really clear on that, because I think the evidence you can see now of people not believing it is that we're very quick to move away from it.
Beth?
Yeah, I would flip it round, and I think there's a real opportunity. We're in a very traditional sector that has very traditional ways of working in terms of how we offer our education and our research, and that sector is in some crisis at the moment from a financial perspective. And actually the only way to get out of that, I think, is to be really diverse and different and creative in how we think about the solutions. So in my hopeful phase, actually what we need is that real, is that diversity of people, of thinking, of ways, of solutions, in order to solve what are long-standing issues financially across the sector over the last 10 to 15 years, if not further. So I guess my hope is that we can use this as an opportunity to bring in those different ways of working. We
can't afford not to, really.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. So what role does senior leadership play then in championing and sustaining gender equality initiatives within higher education? If I come to you first, Beth.
It's every role. I think it's the most important bit, but I think the most important bit is that we have to live those values, and we've got to really live them really openly. So we've got to say, I'm finishing early tomorrow because I'm going to watch my son's school play, and not hide that, but live it, and be there and tell people when you're struggling, and be open about the juggle and the balance, and that when you need to take time off. And Gemma, to your point, when your son was ill, not try and work round it, but try and work with it, and so that we can see for our junior staff that it's okay, and that they can be working parents or working people that have more to life than just their work, whether that be as mums or as anything else. There's lots of other things that are really important to people. So for me, that's the most important thing. And then, as I said, thinking about how we bring in staff to really come up with really creative solutions to some of the long-standing problems that the sector has. And it's really imperative that leadership in the sector are looking for those different people to bring in and work with, and come up with some interesting solutions, because the old traditional ones are not particularly working very well at the moment, I would say.
Thanks, Beth. Alice?
Yeah, I think it's all about walking the talk, role modeling, focusing on trying to be, I mean, what Beth said, be authentic, be ourselves, be open, be honest, and then hope that others see that and feel that they can be more of themselves too. And I think it's probably also about valuing and recognizing and celebrating when other people do that too. And if you think about the most impactful, inspiring leaders that you've ever come across, I know if I ask myself that question, they are people who I felt are real human beings, and who are being kind of authentic and honest in how they are getting through things, and sharing those lessons with other people as well. I think, yeah, the power of storytelling cannot be underestimated. So I think if we also can get better and more confident, and feel comfortable sharing our stories in a way that others will benefit from, then that will be great.
Thanks, Alice. Karen?
I was just thinking about a point that Alice just said around sharing stories and being your true authentic self. And what struck me more than anything else, I think it was following the birth of my second daughter. Whilst I was away, I actually had a male colleague who stepped in as an interim, and I actually felt quite threatened because I thought, this is a junior member of staff here, and how is it now that I'm going on to maternity leave, this person has suddenly got all the skills necessary to do the role that's taken me ages to do. And I do remember, as a result of that, I was in such a rush to get back from maternity leave. I felt I needed to protect my role, as you do, human nature after all. And I had a female line manager at the time who sat down and met with me prior to me returning back from maternity leave. And I'm ever so thankful, because one of the advice she gave me is that your family will be there. Work can come and go. And, they may make a decision to get rid of you just like that. Take the necessary time out that you need to spend with your family. And if you are keen, because somebody said, I think it might have been yourself, Beth, nobody knows the challenges or what it's always like being a new mother. And I remember her saying, if you are quite keen to get back to work sooner than later, my advice I can work with you, but let's do a phased return. Because I recognize that not everybody enjoys motherhood, not everybody likes all the changes. And that's what I was reminded of when I reflected on the comment that Alice said around having somebody that you can look up to, somebody that actually walks the talk, that role model, and somebody that's in that position of leadership that can help others that are coming up behind. So definitely being authentic and modeling the right behavior for others that are coming up there behind them and wanting to progress within their careers as well. Explaining to them, sharing those stories, that it won't always be easy, and you can't do everything as well. We're a human after all. Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. Monica?
Picking up on that theme of family and commitments and children, I think as leaders of higher education institutions, we have got a responsibility towards the next generation and what world we're leaving behind for them. And I really think that we need to be extremely bold at this time, to keep those avenues and channels open where girls and women of tomorrow will continue to have and benefit from the opportunities that we've had. So I was just reading recently an article where a number of big multinational organizations stemming and reducing the funding that supports girls in STEM subjects, right? We're going to see a shrinkage of scholarships opportunities that have benefited my generation immensely. If that goes, can you imagine the world? what opportunities we're going to leave behind for those girls who could achieve greatness in their future, but are denied those opportunities. So I think what I would like to see is a world where, as leaders in this sector, we are setting great examples of championing women's and girls' rights, as well as their opportunities, creating those pipelines and opportunities for them.
Thanks, Monica. Over to you, Gemma, for the last question.
Okay, so this is a question for all of you, but I'll start very quickly with Alice, if that's okay. How do you personally champion gender equality?
Oh, I do it all day, every day now. So I left my full-time role in higher education at Oxford University last July so that I could focus all of my time and attention on WEN. And WEN is an organization that I founded 10 years ago, in 2015. I cannot believe that it's been 10 years, with the explicit intention of accelerating gender equity across the higher education sector. We can't do everything, so we're trying to focus on a few key things that we believe will make a fundamental difference. So that is my absolute pleasure to be able to get up and do that now every day. Yeah, that's the that's the answer.
Great position to be in. I'll come to you, Beth, if it's okay.
I think the most important thing for me is being that advocate. I've been incredibly lucky of having loads of advocates over the years who have really supported me and helped given me that boost, both male and female, and to points that were made earlier about how important it is to have men supporting us as well. And so I really try never to say no whenever if somebody asks for a bit of help or a mentoring session or some advice on something, really to be there and to give the next people the opportunities that I feel like I had, and that support. And then that bit about being authentic. I try to be really open and honest with how difficult things can be sometimes. My fabulous sister always says, hope is not a strategy. And I think that one plays out really well for me is, we have to have a strategy. We can't just hope that it's going to get better. We've got to do something. And even if it's just small within our little spheres of influence.
Thanks, Beth. And Karen?
Not too dissimilar from Beth, actually. So providing mentorship both informally and formally, sharing, I guess, my stories in terms of that storytelling and best practices, discussing the hurdles, the obstacles. And I'm always looking for an opportunity to help to promote women in leadership. So share, for example, the WEN network, the Aurora course, any opportunity that I get to discuss how, I guess, women can advance their career, particularly within higher education. I will take that opportunity to offer mentorship and to provide networks for these individuals to progress as well. And not too dissimilar, but walking that talk. So I'm a gym buddy, and everybody knows, all my direct reports, everybody I work with know that I have that great work and life balance. I will go to the gym each morning before I start work. There's some days where I might decide to finish early because it's okay as long as I get the work done. So really champion equality and recognizing that outside of work that we all have a life as well. And sometimes we may have to focus on that because of personal circumstances over work, but allowing individuals to understand that's okay. And I support that as well.
Great, thanks, Karen. And finally, Monica.
Great. Personally, well, what do? I collect stories. I I reach out to people like yourselves, inspirational women, get their stories and showcase them to the rest of the world, because we need to do this. We can't do enough of it. I think we need to tell these stories, lift each other up whenever we possibly can. And I should say that I owe a debt of gratitude to Karen here, who was quite fundamental in getting the whole storytelling initiative started when it was in very early stages and quite fledgling at that time. So I think I am passionate about women's role in leadership, and particularly women of colour. So I keep championing that wherever I can. But more importantly, I'd like to see more women out there promoting and supporting each other.
Thanks, Monica.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Gemma, I think that it's the championing, isn't it? And I guess what I try to do is really specific to women you come across who have imposter syndrome, right? Because we've all had that. And I think it's such a female thing to have. So I try wherever I can to dismantle that. and just challenge and go, well, actually, what reality is this based on? I guess it's a sort of coaching technique, but really to try and get people to understand that it is a female thing, and you can overcome it, and just trying to shine a light on the fact that it is not true, that you are absolutely capable. So building that confidence. I remember really, really early on in my career, I had I think it was I joined a graduate scheme at Royal Mail, and the CEO of Royal Mail International at the time, I had 15 minutes with her when I first joined, and she gave me one piece of advice, which was never apply for a job you can do. Always leave some room in it, otherwise you'll get bored within 6 months. And also, all of the blokes will not be going for every single bit in the job description that they can tick off, right? They will, 4 out of 10 is enough for them to apply for the job. So never be that person where you have to tick everything in the job before you apply for it. And that just tells such a strong story, I think. It's not just about whether you go for a job, but it is, do you put yourself out there, or do you wait until I have all the experience to be able to do that? And I think sharing that story and stories like it just make it quite real for other women as well, because we all have that little imposter parrot sat on our shoulders, I think, and helping to just shoo that parrot away, I think can make a really, really big difference.
Yeah, I mean, that really resonates with me, because obviously I came in as head of procurement here, and then within 8 months I was given the opportunity, and sort of I put myself forward to say, the person that was head of SUPC left the organisation, so I was only new in, and if I'd looked at that job spec sort of when they went out for the head of SUPC, I wouldn't have applied for it, because I wouldn't have thought I had the skill set to actually deliver the job. And lucky for me, there was an opportunity for me to say, hang on a minute, before you go out, let me trial it for 6 months. Let me show you that I can actually do this job. I was still sort of finding my feet as head of procurement, but I really took that chance on myself, because I suffer really badly from imposter syndrome. And here I am 2 years later as head of SUPC. So when I reflect back and I look at that job description, I'd have never applied for the role, because I didn't think I had the skill set to do it. So it just shows you, when you're given an opportunity, or you actually take a chance on yourself as an individual, what strides you can make in your career to actually sort of believe in yourself a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think we have a responsibility, right? It's very sort of black and white, but there are those women who lift others up.
Absolutely.
And find that actually I had strong women do that for me in my career, so I'm going to be that person. Or there are other women who say, well, it's really tough for me to get here, so I'm going to make it equally tough for other people. Be the person who lifts others up, be that person, because that's the bit that's going to shift the dial.
Thank you, everybody. It's been really insightful conversations, and really enjoyed hearing your stories and your thoughts around how we accelerate action for women. I think it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to get together, and it's been great conversations. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Let's go do it. Any other final thoughts? Nuggets?
We rise. I don't know where that came from. I just came out with it. We rise.
We rise.